Hey class, we're back. Welcome back. I gave a intro to the sections that you're not going to be quizzed or held responsible over. This is where the quiz will begin with 20.3. We're on page 329 in your books if you'd like to follow along. But I'm going to start this video here. If you haven't seen the first video, please check that out because I just couldn't help skipping all that other material. It was just so good. But this is where you will be responsible for the quiz. I want to pick up with D-Day. We're in the latter end of the war. We get in the war in 1941. We've been in since 1941. Here it is, June of 1944. And we start to get the upper hand over the Axis powers. We're talking about Europe now. And it gets to the point where we say we have to invade Europe in order to get to Hitler. So the Allied commanders, led by Eisenhower, as we saw earlier, has to make this tough decision. They know that they're going to send thousands and thousands of men to their deaths, and that's a tough call. But they understand that this has to be done in order to win the war. So the early days of June, Eisenhower decides to go with this launch, this invasion of Normandy, France. And June 4th is the first day he had said, but because of the conditions, the temperature, or the weather and the winds and the water, it was not good for the invasion. It was very difficult to get the boats through. They'd be afraid they were just sitting ducks, so they cancel it for the 4th. The next day, same story. The weather is not good for this invasion, so they call it off again. So all day they're looking at the weather, and June 6th is a little bit better, but they see for the next couple of weeks is going to be the same kind of weather. So this is the small window that they have. Eisenhower has to make the tough decision. Does he send them in, which is going to be even harder because of the weather? Or does he wait several weeks and stall it later? Can it stall? Um, or can we wait to go take out Hitler? And Eisenhower says, go. And he actually tells the men, the world is watching. The eyes of the world are on you. And sure enough, that's true. They take off in the middle of the night. And on June 6, 1944, at the very beginning of the day, as sun is rising, they hit the beaches. Now they're going to attack 5 different beaches, and each beach has its difficulty with the terrain, with the amount of Germans that are there. Each division is going to fall into some difficulty there, but the guns from the boats are firing onto the beach before the men will actually be launched out. And even as the men start on the boats, you see some of the smaller boats that are bringing the men in that picture on 329. The Germans open fire, and it is a very costly invasion, and it is a very dangerous and very risky move, but the Allies get the beachhead, which is what you see it on 329. This is several hours after the invasion, obviously, because we're able to start farming supplies. You see stacks of supplies, you see the cars lined up. But this was well after the invasion was taking place. Now the troops have pushed inward, and they're meeting up with the paratroopers that have come down the night before. And they start pushing into France. They start meeting up with the French resistance that was like Charles de Gaulle, and they start meeting up with those Frenchmen that were not in compliance with the Germans in France. And they start tag teaming against the Germans. They start pushing them out of France. And Germany is running backwards back toward Germany, but Hitler gives one command for the men to moves their supplies, and gives one last attack to the Allies, and that's at the Battle of the Bulge. And I know what you're thinking. You've probably heard this before, and the only time you've probably heard this is when people talk about their weight, right? They're fighting the Battle of the Bulge, is the bulge of their stomach. Uh, this is not what most people think of when they hear the Battle of the Bulge. In fact, if you were to say the Battle of the Bulge, I'm not sure they would actually understand what the Battle of the Bulge is. Well, on 330, you will see the Battle of the Bulge, and this is the last great German attack. After this, they are able to break through some of the Allies' lines, but the Allies are going to regroup. They're going to fight the Germans back, and after this, the Germans are going to be running back the whole entire time, all the way back to Berlin, their capital. And in fact, whenever they get to Berlin, Hitler has to run to his bunker. We saw that in the video. And that's where he will commit suicide, and he will tell his men, his generals, to burn his body after he has committed suicide. That way the Allies won't be able to get his body. Because on May 7th, 1945, Germany will surrender. And the Allies are going to go after these top leaders in the Nazi army and hold them responsible for what they've done in the war. They won't get Hitler because he committed suicide. The day he committed suicide was May 2nd, so very close to the surrender. But we don't celebrate May 7th, we celebrate May 8th, the day after, as VE Day. Stands for Victory in Europe Day. But notice the date, May 8th, 1945. But this does not mean World War II is done, because over in the Pacific, we're still fighting the Japanese. So Europe is all out of war in May, but the United States is still fighting Japan, and we're going to see that after this. But the Nuremberg trials, excuse me, is the name of a town in Germany, Nuremberg, and this is where they're going to hold these court trials and hold the German officials responsible. They're going to hang many of them for the torturous and inhumane acts they did, or imprison them, and that's where they decide what to do with these generals. Next, if it works, we see war in the Pacific. Now, this will go on several months later, but it'll be the same year. So we say World War II ends in 1945. Depends on what you're talking about, Europe or Asia. Europe ends faster than Asia, but it is the same year. Asia is harder because the Japanese are much harder to fight, because they're a militaristic government, which means the emperor is their military leader. And he tells the people, military and citizens, do not surrender. And the Japanese will not surrender for anything, which makes fighting much, much harder. In fact, on Iwo Jima, probably the most famous of the Pacific battles, it's a very small volcanic island. In fact, it's just pretty much one mountain. It's a very small island, but the amount of men that will die on Iwo Jima is amazing, because it shouldn't have been that hard. And in fact, with the amount of men that we put on the island, the Japanese are vastly outnumbered, but they do not give up. The United States will take the island. We will take control of the island, and it will be a very, very difficult fight because of the Japanese mindset. And this is a famous picture you see on 330 of the men raising the flag on Iwo Jima. And in fact, all of those men that you see will die. There's actually photographs of them raising the flag, but that's on top of the mountain. But the fighting is still going on. We are claiming that island, but it will take much more fighting after that to completely clear the island. And the Japanese are going to strongly resist us the whole way up to Japan. And what we're doing is island hopping. You may have seen that on a couple sites before, but we're literally going to go to major islands in the Pacific. We're not going to take every single island that the Japanese have. We're going to take the very important islands. But the Japanese are going to give us great resistance, especially with the kamikazes, which, if you have this mindset of don't surrender, do everything for your emperor, you are willing to commit suicide for the mother country, for Japan. That's what these guys are doing. They're going to fly fully loaded planes into ships and we don't have buildings, but mainly into ships, to destroy the ship as much as possible. And that's their mission. They know they're going to die, and they're willing to fly their plane right into the ships. um, and they're known as the kamikaze fighters. Well, the president at this time is Harry S. Truman because Roosevelt dies at the beginning of 1945. Now, Truman has that tough decision on, are we going to keep moving toward Japan and losing these American lives? Or do we drop this new bomb that we've developed on Japan? Now, with the new bomb, you have this moral decision on, are we going to destroy these Japanese lives and the citizens um, in order to save American blood? And he makes a decision to drop the bomb. He had kept it secret. It was called the Manhattan Project, and he's going to get several scientists together. One is Albert Einstein, that's really going to push for this bomb. And then you also see several others. Fermi, Teller, and Oppenheimer are going to finally develop splitting the atom, and the energy that is expelled from that is amazing and tremendous and devastating. And you can see pictures of, not in your book, but you can see pictures of what the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki look like, and it's just obliterated. So it takes the bombing of these two cities before Japan will finally say, okay, we surrender. And Truman says this loss of life with a bomb is much less than if we were to actually invade Japan. Because he says, by the way the Japanese are acting, we're going to have to go all the way to Tokyo, and it's going to be a very, very difficult and long fight. So he makes that decision. Finally, Japan agrees to surrender. You can see it on 331, the official surrender, with Douglas MacArthur on board the Missouri, and he signs the surrender. September 2nd, 1945. I want to see this picture at Yalta on 332. I want to mention these three men, the big three they call it. Notice where Churchill is. He's on the far left. Notice Stalin is on the far right. And notice who's right in the middle. Roosevelt. And that is not by accident. In fact, Churchill and Stalin hated each other so much that Roosevelt had to sit right in the middle of them in order to keep somewhat peace in these meetings. Even though we're on the same team, the mentality that Stalin has does not agree with Churchill's mentality. Roosevelt is literally kind of in the middle of them. He's kind of sympathetic with the communists, um, and he's kind of the mediator between the two. But if you look at him, he does not look very well at all. In fact, after this meeting, he's going to come home and he's going to die just a couple months after this meeting. And that's when Truman takes power. Next, we're going to go very quickly. We've got two more slides. After this, we start to see these two ideologies, Americanism versus communism, fight. It's called the Cold War because no physically fighting actually happened. It got very close. But this idea of freedom, what your book calls Americanism, against communism, which is oppression and control. So the Cold War is who can get the most power. And Churchill is going to describe it as the Iron Curtain. All of Europe from Russia all the way to Germany is under this Iron Curtain where communism has this iron strength and they are not wanting anyone to know what's going on behind them. So Truman comes up with a doctrine that says, listen, if any country, any free country is feeling threatened by communism, we will be there to help you. We will stand up for you. So we see these two mentalities really conflict with the Marshall Plan because this Americanism idea of rebuilding Europe with a free market economy is not what the communists say. So we see these two conflicts in Germany specifically, East and West Germany, but very specific in Berlin because as the Russians come in from the East and Americans and allies from the West, they have to split Germany right in the middle to keep it even. And they're going to do the same thing to Berlin as well. Kind of like whenever your siblings are fighting, everything has to be even. Same thing in this. Well, you can imagine what communism is going to do and what Americanism is going to do, but communists get so upset they don't play fair, so they just cut off East Germany completely. They build the wall, the Berlin Wall, and we can't get in to help the Western Berlin. So we fly planes in. It's called the Berlin Airlift. We fly planes in with supplies, and we're able to help them. In fact, planes were landing every 45 5 seconds.